question, and I give the call to the member for Lyne.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise in support of the Recycling and Waste Reduction Bill and the associated bills and consequential and transitional provisions. Madam Speaker, most Australians in the status quo, it's a quick and easy process. You put stuff in the bin when you're finished. If you're a conscientious citizen of Australia, you separate it into the red, the green, the yellow bin, and then that's about the last thing that you think about. But we do have a massive problem in this country. We have huge amounts of waste that historically we have either shipped interstate, shipped into landfill or shipped overseas. And it's really good that we are now looking after our own waste, cleaning up our own mess. These bills will put effect to that by announcing in a sequential fashion the cessation of unprocessed waste being exported overseas. And I really think it just shows that our nation has grown up. Everyone's aware of the recycling of plastics and other sorts of waste that end up in our waterways or end up in the oceans of the world or end up in giant eddies in the Northern Hemisphere or down the throat of sea life, even leading to death or drowning, birds, seals, fish, you name it. And even the small particles of the plastic can end up in living animals. It really is a game changer that we have got this sequential legislative ban on exporting unprocessed waste. This legislation will put effect to our National Waste and Policy Action Plan, of which there are 7 main streams. As I mentioned, unprocessed plastic waste, paper, glass and tyres will be not able to be exported anymore. We have a goal of reducing waste by 10% for every Australian by 2030. Now, as each of us actually produce, by all the things that are provided for us, 2.7 tonnes of waste each a year. So that means reducing our own personal waste by 300 kilos per year. Now, if you think how much you put in your bin, that is a lot of waste. But there's all this indirect waste that you don't see, which is produced to deliver all the other things that we have in our modern life. So even though families and individuals have been recycling and using reusable bags at the supermarket, this goes beyond to governments, to institutions, to states, to local councils and so on. We are aiming on the third action item to recover 80% of the average waste that normally goes off into other streams. We're also aiming to increase use of recycled content by both, as I said, government and industry, not just individuals. And we are also aiming to phase out problematic, unnecessary plastics by 2025. Only 16% of our plastic waste is recycled or reused. We also want to reduce organic waste that's going into landfill. By the practical things we can do is composting on site in your own home or in your own back garden, having your worm farm, having stuff go into the green recycling bin so it can be turned into compost on an industrial scale, having your own worm farm. But as I said, these bits of legislation are aimed at the bigger fish in the pond, the macro waste, not just individual household waste. We also need to have accurate data and reporting on how we're going in reducing that. This legislation will turbocharge the process of product stewardship, which was initiated back in 2011 when we weren't in government, but the ALP was on the government benches. And it has taken root in lots of businesses, but this will now turbocharge that effort. So good design, so that it can be designed to be used again, is the aim of product stewardship. Taking responsibility for what you design is a really good initiative. Many of us remember when we used to get our milk in bottles. The milker used to drop it off at your front doorstep, and that bottle was used time and time and time again. And glass is very reusable. Even if it's broken, it can be re-smelted and reused. Aluminium cans, everyone's familiar with the recycling of can initiative, at least in the state of New South Wales. It was quite disruptive when it first came out, but now that it's up and running, it's a really good initiative. Now, some people see this ban as just another bit of government intervention, but really, as I said, it's long overdue. And waste shouldn't be looked at as a problem. Waste is a resource, and if you do recycle intelligently, you can turn that waste resource into a commodity, something that's valuable that you can sell. If you design it well, you can use it multiple times. In fact, it can be designed to be reused and recycled. Multi-use food containers. Everyone used to have glass for jams and preserves and things like that, and it's just that the quick and easy bit is just putting it into another piece of paper. That leads to another problem. Our paper and cardboard waste. That is recyclable, very much recyclable, if you get it into a recycling system. It can be repurposed, come back as cardboard. If you really want to get serious, you can turn it back into fresh paper. So all these things are ultimately recyclable. It's just that we've got to have a system that it happens on a macro scale. Look at tyres. Tyres are energy rich. Not only is there the plastics and carbon residue of the actual tyre bit, but there's all these precious metals in the wire and the reinforcing. And by the wonders of technology, all that end-of-life plastics can be reused through pyrolysis and turned into road-ready diesel and petrol. There are systems that have been developed in Australia that give incredibly high returns. Up to 85% of the energy can be returned into diesel, petrol, marine diesel, and even avgas. And depending on which pyrolytic process you use, you can also turn it into liquid petroleum gases. So very recyclable, and it's a huge resource that we should be tapping into, because otherwise we've got to drill for more oil somewhere else. So it might seem like it's difficult, but if the price of oil goes up, all these recycled fuels become very, very cost competitive. And the standards that this Australian process, which is now being developed to be put into place in Thailand, in Amsterdam, in Northampton, in England, and potentially in the US, will deliver fuels that meet Euro 6 standards. So it's very effective. And then other resources, like batteries. Everyone talks about renewable energy. Well, the thing with renewable energy is they have to be renewed the whole time, because solar panels only have a 20 to 25-year life. So we're going to have a recycling plan for them, because there is a lot of energy embedded in a solar panel. You have to be using your solar panel for 4 years to make up for the carbon footprint of the manufacturing of a standard solar panel. So if you then just throw it on a garbage tip or bury it, you're just going to have to create another carbon footprint to make another panel. So we've got to start planning now to recycle all these millions and millions of solar panels that are being produced around the world. Everyone's turning to batteries. Now, batteries, as we know, Madam Speaker, they're not a source of energy, they're a source of storage for energy that's produced by something else. And they have a huge carbon footprint too. In fact, when the Prius first came out, they estimated that you have to run that Prius for 11 years to make up for all the copper and all the wiring and the second motor and the battery itself. So if you're just going to use a battery in a Prius and then chuck it on a heap, you'll have all these toxic battery metals and elements rotting away, and you could be turning it into a recycled battery. landfill with plastic and steel and all these potentially recyclable metals like copper and rare earths should be an absolute no-no. Our oceans and waterways shouldn't be filling up with plastic. If we do our bit in Australia and set an example for other nations, it will be a really good thing for the planet. We are, compared to some other nations, quite behind on how much we recycle. Rubbish can be turned into jobs. It can be turned into money. Like I said, if we are smart about the way we manage our waste, it will lead to not only just a cleaner local environment, a cleaner global environment, but in Australia we will have much more employment and much more economic activity. And the exciting thing about these waste systems is they can be done in regional areas, they can be done in metro areas. In fact, I might just say a few words about pyrolysis. Now, pyrolysis among some quarters in the Australian body politic is seen as some evil process because you're burning stuff. There's actually no oxygen. You're heating stuff and you're recycling it and turning it into either liquid fuels or liquid petroleum gases or biochar, which is great for increasing the soil carbon. All sorts of things come out of it, and it's a wonderful technology, yet we are very slow in the uptake. Everyone has been used to just putting things in an incinerator, but a pyrolytic plant is not an incinerator. Sure, there's heat and there's melting, but people have got to realise, as I said, we either got to keep drilling for oil everywhere or we get sensible about using the resources that we've got now. It will be a lot easier to utilise all those tyre and bits of rubber and plastics that go into cars and all sorts of things. And people talk about carbon sinks. Well, when you're changing hydrocarbons to another shape or form, that is recycling. I mean, some of these long-lived plastics are a store of carbon. You know, some of the plastics, depending on what type you make, can last for hundreds of years, but that is a carbon sink in itself. And so that's what I think there needs to be a step change in the way people are thinking about burning stuff. In the old days, Australian councils used to have incinerators, hospitals used to have incinerators, and you just chucked everything in the back and you didn't think about it. And that was incredibly wasteful because you had all that energy. At least you should, you know, heat your water for industrial purposes or to heat your building. But no, we just used to chuck everything in. But the pyrolytic techniques are really advanced around the world. But now that we have got this legislation coming through, these sort of things will, by their very requirement to meet the legislation, turn the economy and turn entrepreneurs into using this sort of technology in Australia, and it will be great for the economy. Some people think if it's plastic now, you've just got to shred it up into little bits and pieces and put it in a playground as a soft landing spot or put it into a road. But I think we can be much smarter and get much better energy outcomes out of this resource rather than just having it sitting inert and rotting over, 30 or 50 years or whatever. And as I mentioned, this legislation turns to unprocessed plastic, glass and tyres and paper, but there are so many other things that we need to turn our mind and our economy to, and those ones that I mentioned, batteries and solar panels, are top of the pops because there's a lot of energy involved in making them, and if you just put them into a landfill, you've wasted that energy. We should be reusing it all again, and rather than starting another mine somewhere, reuse all the copper, and let alone all the iron waste that's sitting around the country. There must be millions of tonnes of old iron and steel and aluminium that can be recycled. We just got to get a big enough scale to make it pay and make it work. So these bills, they have a lot of other technical provisions, preventing and fining people and prosecuting people if they are sending off unprocessed waste. It's a great initiative. We have got a significant allocation in the budget into recycling modernisation, $190 million. We've got $20 million for the National Product Stewardship Scheme that I mentioned, $35 million to implement our National Waste Policy Action Plan that I started talking about, and also our waste data. It's going to require a whole system, and there's an appropriation of $24.6 million for that.
Thanks
and
to the member
also
for Lyme.
cooperative research centres.
Your time